Welcome back to another Football After Show. We're just back after the Manchester United and Granada quarter-final in the Europa League. I'm joined by Callum and I'm joined by Joe today. First of all, Callum, how are you doing today after that riveting performance by Manchester United?
I'm doing well. I thought it was a professional performance is probably the kindest way to describe it. I thought Granada were very physical, as I'm sure we'll come to. And to be fair, I thought United dealt with a physical challenge tonight quite well, but it wasn't the most enthralling game. But you'll take a win and a couple of away goals any day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I know a lot of our talk will be about their performance, Joe, but at the end of the day, it's a quarter-final away in a European competition. 2-0, job done. Is that all we really need to take from this game?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously we're going to read into the performances because, the performances that have come before this have not been great. So this just is another one in a long line, and it sort of keeps the conversation going, doesn't it, about how we're playing at the moment. I think that second goal might be a big goal, though, to be fair, because, even with the 1-0 win, you don't expect Granada to maybe do anything outrageous at Old Trafford, but with one goal, you're never quite sure, are you? And I didn't think United's play necessarily merited that second goal, but I do think, like Callum said, they were comfortable enough in the game. And I think, considering the players that are now be missing for the next leg, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about as well, it just makes the job a little bit easier and hopefully a little bit less nervy next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, get your comments in. Tell us what you thought of the game. Again, very interesting performance by United. I think very much like a cup away game there, Callum. We mentioned it before in terms of a professional performance. Do you think that's a little bit more important at this stage of the season, that you can kind of come away with a win, especially away from home, even when you don't exactly play your best brand of football?
Absolutely, and I think one of the things I've said quite a few times and I've got a wee bit of stick for is I think every club, including United, at this stage of the season has to utilise the squad. The schedule has been packed this year because of COVID and late starts and late ends. So I think it's vital that you use your squad. I think the only thing that concerns me is, for instance, Luke Shaw's coming off at half-time. Now, if Luke Shaw's coming off at half-time for a rest, that's fine, but I worry he might have picked up an injury. It certainly looks that way anyway. And I think if you are going to make changes, then tonight I actually think it's one of those games where you could have started Tellez, but the way I look at it, as I say, a professional performance. When you look at the side that was put out, I don't think there would be too many complaints. There's not too many complaints, I have to be honest with you, from my personal point of view. I think Mason Greenwood should get a sustained run through the middle now that Martial is injured between now and the end of the season. I thought he was okay tonight. He wasn't, again, like most of the players, he wasn't spectacular, but I thought he was good. In terms of the performance, as we've all said so far, if you'd offered me before the game 2 away goals and a clean sheet, I would have taken it. And one of the things that I know we will come to, the moment of magic from Lindelof with a pass for the first goal, that was absolutely sensational.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big point there, Joe, that we kind of mentioned earlier on, is that the fact is, at this point of the season, we're seeing it's coming towards the end. And even some of those great teams under Fergie, often towards the end of the season, the football wasn't that great. And it's all about getting the results. And look, we were speaking during the game, and we were saying it was kind of like an extension of some of the other games that we've seen previously from United. But the difference is that they got that first goal, remained calm, and then ended up getting a bit of luck when I think everybody I could see on Twitter and all social media platforms were complaining about the referee, and then he ends up giving us a penalty. Yeah. Do you think now that we have gone 2-0 up, and that obviously with Shaw, Maguire, who else? I think there was somebody else that got suspended as well. McTominay as well. Yeah. So that it's a great chance for us to actually be able to rotate a little bit, because I think one of the criticisms that Ollie has gotten in recent times is that he does stick to that kind of same 11 to 14 players week in, week out, and doesn't really deviate from that much. Well, now he's actually going to be forced to, and it is a chance for somebody to kind of stake a claim and kind of get to play in some of these last few games of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was thinking that exactly that during the game. I was thinking, well, if Ollie doesn't want to rotate, the referee's kind of doing the job for him at the moment. And BT Sport are just flashing up here, sort of Bailly, Maguire, Martial, McTominay and Shaw are all going to be unavailable for that second leg. So, you've got the opportunity now to see what some of the other guys could do. I'd like to see Donny get a game. I know probably not one of those positions or his position that's going to become available. But can they be inventive with his position for a game? Can they try and maybe advanced on that right or left-hand side and get him some minutes playing there? Obviously, we don't know what's going on with Rashford at the moment. I mean, you're on a wing and a prayer with his fitness every game, aren't you, I think? And we'll have to see, obviously, how he recovers from this game. I think Solskjaer wisely took him off after an hour. But obviously, there's a game against Spurs on Sunday that I'm sure he'll be keen for him to play. So it depends how he comes out of that game, because every game that Rashford's going into at the moment, I'll be honest with you, I keep thinking it might be his last of the season, because you just feel he's one bad knock away from a season-ending injury. And when I say that, it sounds dramatic, but the season's not too far away now till it ends, you know what I mean, with the condensed schedule. So, we've got to be careful. I mean, the only thing I am quite nervous about when we talk about rotation with United is it seems every time they try and make more than 4 changes, the chemistry of the team goes right down, and that is a worry. And, you'd hope with a 2-0 lead that won't matter against Granada. But like I said earlier, if Granada get an early goal at Old Trafford, if they catch United out like they could have done early on in this game, then it can become a bit nervy. 2-0 is one of those sort of funny scores. And if you've got players in the team who aren't used to playing much this season, haven't got a lot of minutes sort of under their belt, it can become quite tricky. And you think back to that Celta Vigo semi-final, was it, under Jose Mourinho, where the former City striker, his name sort of escapes me at the moment.
John Guidetti.
Yeah, he had a brilliant chance to finish it and win it for Celta Vigo later on. And I was there at Old Trafford. My heart was in my mouth. And, luckily United come through. But, you can't take anything for granted. And there will be a few players playing next week who won't have played a lot this season.
Yeah, it's an interesting one there, Callum, because when I hear Joe talking about that, he's completely correct in terms of anytime we've made wholesale changes, it just hasn't worked. Do you think that's up to the manager, though, in an entire season, especially now with the amount of games that we played in, 2020, 2021, that when you have a problem, when you have to rotate, surely that should have been fixed earlier on in the season, where you don't rotate 5 or 6 players at one time. You bring 1 or 2 in, 1 or 2 out, so then they get used to playing with different players. But it doesn't seem like United have done that too well. It's always the same players that come in or come out. So like if Fred or McTominay go out, it's usually Matic comes in. If you're looking at, for example, Cavani coming out, we had Martial or Greenwood coming in, instead of kind of mixing it up a little bit. Do you think that's something that United will have to improve on if they are to continue playing in seasons where they're going to play the 40 to 50 games a season?
Absolutely. I mean, the squad is always going to be key if you're competing for more than one trophy. Manchester United shouldn't just be focused on the Europa League or just be focused on the league. They should be able to compete in multiple competitions towards the business end of the season, and that's where the squad has to be strengthened. I think it's vital this summer that Manchester United are able to keep Cavani and Pogba, because United can't afford to lose 2 key components of their ideal first 11 and have to chase replacements for them, because then the squad will be threadbare in certain positions as it has been this year. I agree with Joe. I think the reason you see so few rotations at times from United is because I don't think Ollie thinks he can trust certain individuals in certain positions. I mean, when you even look at Telles, I mean, when Telles came in, it was heralded by people like myself as being a really astute signing. It's definitely helped Luke Shaw improve his game, but there is still an element of when Luke Shaw is not playing, it's not the same level of strength. And Van de Beek's in the same situation. When he arrived, people, again, I hold my hands up, myself included, thought that's a really astute signing. That's someone that will probably help you in your first 11. But even if he's a squad player, he'll be an excellent squad player. Whereas, let's be honest, we haven't really seen that when he's been given opportunities. And I know he's settling into a new environment, and the Eredivisie is not quite the Premier League, although it is a strong competition. So maybe next season you'll see the benefit of those 2 players in particular, which will help United. But it is frustrating, and you're right as well, Ciaran, when you talk about rotation. United don't seem to rotate one or two. Whenever they eventually rotate, it's 4 or 5, and it seems to be, as you've said as well, Joe, a culture shock. The chemistry of the side completely falls flat at times, and you're caught out. And this second leg against Granada, normally I'm of the opinion when you're rotating a squad, as Sir Alex used to say, start with your strongest 11 for the first 55, 60 minutes. If you've got an advantage, then you can get maybe your 3 best players off for the last half an hour and give younger players like Diallo, Alanga, who's on the bench, maybe an opportunity. But I think United are going to have to be a little bit more streetwise in this second leg and potentially rest a few to start with, like a Fernandes, like a few others, and bring them in if they're required, because if you're playing 40 or 50 games, I'm not one of these people that thinks footballers can't play 3 games in a week. Of course they can. You look at Ronaldo, you look at Messi, those guys play week in, week out, year in, year out, and they're very rarely injured, so it can be done. But I do think you have to also take this season into consideration in the crazy schedule. Obviously, you've got to consider that some of these players have got a major European tournament this summer as well. Fernandes will be desperate to represent Portugal at that. So I think that Ollie's going to have to trust his squad more towards the end of the season. But as you've said, Ciaran, I would do that with 1 or 2 at a time, maybe 3 at a push. I think when you go 4, 5, 6 at a time, then the chemistry does fall flat and you're putting yourself at risk. This Tottenham game at the weekend, I've got to be honest with you, it really does worry me, because the thing that frustrates me with Jose Mourinho as a manager, I mean, what was the quote the other day? Same coach, different players, or whatever it was. You just think to yourself, he always makes it all about him. And the problem with Mourinho is, even when he appears at his lowest ebb, he'll pull out a result in a big game and he'll use it to sort of throw shade at other coaches and other players and other individuals or pundits, whoever it may be. And I just worry that he's under a bit of pressure. The Newcastle game for Tottenham didn't go well. He's one of those managers that he's always due a result, or he's always due a big moment where he feels that he can change the narrative. It's not quite at that nuclear stage, I don't think, at Tottenham for him, where you can see it's simply a matter of when. I know people are hinting at that, but I think he's still got scope to last for the rest of this season and potentially the start of next, and then it'll go one way or the other. But as I say, I'm very nervous about that game, and although I'm saying you have to use the squad, you have to do it wisely. You can't make wholesale changes, because this United squad simply isn't strong enough. I mean, the last thing I'll say on this, I know this is a long answer. You look at Manchester City and their bench. Manchester City can make 5 or 6 changes, and see if they're playing at home, you won't notice a monumental difference, because they've got quality in every position twice over. United, you do start to notice. I think it's one of those ones where, could you imagine if Fernandes was out for 10 games, who realistically would come in and be able to do his job? I don't think Donny van de Beek's at that standard yet. Pogba's hit and miss when he's pushed further forward in that position. And McTominay and Fred certainly aren't going to be two guys that are going to be overly creative if you put them and thrust them further forward. So, as I say, I think they have to be wise with the rotation, but it is a bit of a worry.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
And just add to that what Callum's saying as well. I mean, with the comparison with City as well, you feel like there's a way of playing, a way of life at Man City as well, that when you make changes, everybody knows the way you want to play. And I mean, we've labelled this criticism at Ollie before, and I suppose this is where you can it does shine a light on it. If you haven't got a clear plan or a clear way in which you want to play, I think that also makes it tougher for players coming in, because not everyone necessarily knows the script. And I think then what you're really relying on is that relationship between players, if you know what I mean, that chemistry between players. And like I say, as soon as you take 1 or 2 of those building blocks out, it all falls down. Whereas with Manchester City, it's not necessarily about the player relationships. It's about the plan as a team. And it doesn't matter who's playing next to you. He will make the same run regardless of who it is. He will make that pass if you make the run. It's all it's there. It's a clear plan. But with United, you feel like it's all just about relationships on the pitch between individuals. And when those individuals play together, it's great. Like we said before, the difference with Juan Mata when he plays with Bruno Fernandes on the pitch compared to when we've seen Juan Mata this season, especially without Bruno Fernandes on the pitch, is two different players. And that shows that the reliance on actual individual or pairing up player relationships rather than just that clear team plan that you sort of ingrain into a club over time like Pep Guardiola has at City.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you actually make there, Joe, in terms of, I've always said the City have that distinct style that no matter who gets brought in, they play in the style that Pep Guardiola wants to play, and you fit that system. And it's when one person comes out, one person goes in, and it looks like the same Man City team. Unfortunately for United is, at the moment, they are reliant on individual players that are excellent players in their own right. You look at the likes of when Rashford's on his day, he can win a game for you. You look at the same with Bruno when Pogba's on his game. But the problem is that unless you have a system to where you can take somebody out and then put someone in and it looks the exact same. Look, the quality may not be the exact same. Like you take Kevin De Bruyne out of Manchester City and you put somebody else in. Okay, that player that comes in won't be able to do things that Kevin De Bruyne can, but it still looks like the same Man City team that are playing. It's a big thing. Like I do a rugby podcast and we were talking about this just this week because we're comparing one of the teams that I support, Leinster, to another team that where Leinster constantly are taking out players. They won their league just 2 weeks ago, and they've used 53 players doing so. So they did it by taking out players, but then anybody that comes in knows exactly how they have to play, and there's a distinct structure. Unfortunately for United, is right now it looks like something like that is missing, and that it is more of like, because they're over-reliant on certain players, that when those players are taken out of the team, the rest of the players don't know actually what to do. And that's a big issue. We look at this second leg, and the one thing that kind of stuck out to me, what you said, Callum, was what do United do in terms of who they bring in at the start? Do you actually go more defensive, try and not exude too much energy, keep it at 0-0 for 55, 60 minutes, and then maybe bring on one or two players where you've kind of wasted a little bit of time? Because look, you're 2-0 up, you don't really have to go out and try and win that game. You just have to make sure that you don't concede. If you don't concede early, then you're in a real good position. Do you think it'd be more beneficial, for considering there will have to be changes, that United do set up a bit more defensively, regardless of if it's at Old Trafford?
I think setting up more defensively probably does make sense, because I think you're going to have to, with the suspensions, you're definitely going to have to change the blend of players that you're going to start with. So I think that's a fair analysis, because at the end of the day, United have got key games in the Premier League, because although you look at the table and you assume United are going to finish second and United aren't going to drop out the top four, you just never know in football. The moment you take your eye off the ball, you can slide down the table. I mean, you think back to Ollie's first time in charge when he was in caretaker charge or interim charge, however you want to say it. The form was absolutely fantastic, and then it went off a cliff. So I think it's important that United are pragmatic when they have to be. I think this season is all about making sure you finish second in the league and the gap to Manchester City doesn't go to 15, 18, 20 points, because if it does, it's very hard to, this summer in the market, say to players, we've got the momentum and we can catch this side. So I think it's vital that United don't let their standards slip in the league, even though they've got a little bit of a gap. And that's where that pragmatism will come in, especially in this second leg. United need to, as you say, if they get a 0-0 or they win 1-0, whatever it may be, United just need to see this second leg out, get to a semi-final, and then put their full energies and preparations into succeeding in the semi-final, because don't forget, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is 4 semi-finals played, 4 defeats. So it's important that United, as you've said, Ciaran, are pragmatic in this second leg, get the job done in a professional manner like they did tonight, but crucially also don't let up in the league, because as I say, I just think I worry for United this summer based on what's coming out of the club. They're telling journalists to obviously expect realism in the market this summer. So that suggests to me that there's not going to be a big pot of money, and there's certainly not going to be any Erling Haaland or players like that arriving. So with that in mind, as I say, for me, United need to make sure they stay between sort of 8, 12 points within City's distance, because, as I say, if you start to fall behind and you end up finishing third in the league and you're 20 points behind, it's really hard to spin it as a really positive season, because United obviously finished third last year, albeit maybe, when you look at it, maybe that was a bit generous. So yeah, pragmatism for me in the second leg is crucial. Don't take your eye off the ball in the league. Keep planning, keep preparing as best you can for every single match that's in front of you. End the season with as strong a momentum as you can. Hopefully the board will then back Solskjaer, because he'll be in a position of strength to say, hey, look, I might have won the Europa League. I'm sitting second in the table with a gap of, as I say, between 8 and 12 points. Back me now and we can push. Whereas I think that argument becomes a lot harder if you go out at the semi-final stage and you're 18 to 20 points behind. Then the board probably think to themselves, why should we give this guy £100 million net or 125, £30 million net when we could maybe invest 50 net, stay top 4 and nothing will change, because it probably won't anyway. So as I say, for me, be pragmatic when you have to be. Keep your eye on the ball in all competitions that you're in, because the moment you focus on one or the other, I think that's a dangerous game. Mourinho played it in 2017. It worked for him, but it doesn't always work for managers, as we've seen elsewhere.
Yeah, like we said, we were just talking about it earlier in terms of the Celta Vigo game. Mourinho was an inch away from not being in that final. That shows you how close some of these games can be. And it is a little bit of a worry, Joe, when you kind of look, if they can get through this second leg, you go into a semi-final where you're probably playing either Ajax or Roma, both teams that played pretty well tonight. If you look at anybody that was kind of watching that game, if you go into 5 semi-finals and you don't win any, that could come to, again, what Callum is saying is, why would the board believe in a coach to give him the 100, 120 million to spend if they don't think that he can actually go on and win things? And one of the things I've always agreed with, and what Callum said, I've seen a lot of people online say, oh, top 4 is guaranteed now when another rival loses a game. But then you actually look at the amount of games that are left and some of the teams United have to play, there's still going to be a challenge there where they have to get through a couple of big games. If they can do that, if they can get through Tottenham this week, they still have to play Leicester again. You know, they have to play Wolves, which they draw 0-0 nearly every single time. So there are a lot of challenges that are ahead for this United team. And I think the reason why I say it's probably best that you do set up defensive next week in the Europa League is because you do actually need some of these players rested for some of those big games ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. You can't take anything for granted. And I think this season and sort of after Project Restart has taught us one thing, you know, you can't take anything for granted, can you? We see some really, really strange results like towards the back end of last season and also this season. And, you talk about being pragmatic there as well. It makes sense, Ciaran, because of the nature of the away goals rule as well. You know, United could come out the blocks at 100 miles an hour and score the first goal. It doesn't change the fact that Granada will still need to score 3 to actually go through. So, I mean, the way it stands at the moment, to go through outright, they'll need to score 3 at Old Trafford, win 3-0. If United score first, they'll still need to score 3. So it doesn't really change the makeup of the game too much. So, you know, I think that's another reason why they don't really need to. I don't think they need to look at that game next week and think we need to start all guns blazing. They just need to grow into the game, settle into a rhythm like they did today, be solid. Because to be honest with you, apart from a few pot shots from long range, which could have caught deflections or caught De Gea out, I didn't really ever feel like Granada could score tonight. I will say, though, obviously, the defence will look different next week. You'll have Alex Tellez in there that's, well, not arguably, he isn't a better defender than Luke Shaw. I think Axel looks absolutely nailed on for a game now next week because obviously there's no Maguire. There's obviously no Bailly either by the looks of it. So Axel probably plays as well. And he's struggled at times this season. So United have just got to make sure that they do find a sort of style and a rhythm and a pattern. And then, you know, like you say, after an hour in the game, you can make some changes. You can look to express yourself and, you know, prepare for the games that are coming up in the league because United can't think now, even if they get to the semis, that they can just take their eye off the ball in the Premier League. And I think the top four's done because, like you said, it's a real tough game. Still got Liverpool as well. I know, they probably won't enjoy coming to Old Trafford. They never usually do, even when they play well. But, the way they're going this season. But you see the Tottenham game, Leicester as well. They'll be tough at Old Trafford. And, the semi's going to be a tough game. Whoever United get, I'm looking at, Roma have gone to Ajax and won 2-1 tonight. And, that'll be tough. Ajax are obviously top of their league as well. There are no easy games now between now and the end of the season for United until maybe it is mathematically sort of safe that they're top four and even better, obviously top two. So we'll see. But I think, Solskjaer's still got work to do in terms of his planning for his squads coming up for the next few games.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the biggest worry that I have, Callum, and I'm just thinking of, let's say they do go defensive. My guess then is Solskjaer will use the attacking players that can catch Granada on the break. And the one worry that I have is that Marcus Rashford plays next week. Because we saw him tonight, he scored a great goal, but he's clearly been injured for the majority of the season. He's really, pretty much every season, I think, since his start at Manchester United, he has been injured. And at some point in time, it's going to take a toll on Rashford. And this is the worst possible time for us to kind of take advantage of him because, again, like we said, we don't have Anthony Martial playing. Really, if anybody else goes down, you're then relying on the likes of Amad Diallo. You're probably relying on some of the younger players in the squad. So do you think that regardless of if Rashford would suit a game next week against Granada, that Solskjaer needs to kind of take a step back, be a little bit more pragmatic, even though people will say that he's a very pragmatic manager, but it's the perfect game to, again, just soak up some pressure, have players like Dan James that can hit them on the counter-attack, and kind of, if you can get a goal or two that way, then it makes the tie a whole lot easier and you can really rest any of your top players for the Premier League game at the weekend.
I think you're spot on in Rashford. He's clearly nursing an issue, which is sooner rather than later will take its toll. The way I see things going with Rashford is he'll be used until top four is mathematically secured. I think once that's secured, you'll maybe see him be rested for the majority of the league games, and someone like young Ahmad might get a run of games between now and the end of the season domestically when that's possible. I think you simply have to rest him for this second leg. I don't think this is a sort of game. Joe's rightly pointed out with the away goals rule, Granada need to come to Old Trafford and score 3 goals. So I don't think you play Rashford from the start and risk him for 90 minutes that he may not really need to be risked for. I think you have to be I think you have to be cautious with him. I think for the big games at the moment, your Tottenhams, your Leicesters, your Liverpools, he will have to play unless that sort of top four or second in the league where you want to be is mathematically secure, because he is, you've seen it tonight, he's nursing an injury, but he's still one of United's best players, and he is capable of a moment of brilliance. And one of the things I'd like to say about him is I've been quite critical of him as a finisher because I don't think he is a natural finisher. For me, Mason Greenwood is far more natural when it comes to going through and goal than Marcus Rashford is. However, the last 2 games, 2 ice cool finishes, great first touch tonight for the goal, and ice cool again at the weekend against Brighton. So he's definitely stepping up to the plate, but you are right, that can only continue for so long. And how far are you willing to push him? As I say, I wouldn't be pushing him in every single game between now and the end of the season. I think you're going to have to be, as I say, cautious with his game time, and I don't think, for me personally anyway, there might be people listening to this thinking, no, I think he has to play, but I disagree. I think you've got someone like young Ahmad there who can come in, will be chomping at the bit for the opportunity, and for me, he's the sort of player I'd be starting in the second leg. And if I'm Solskjaer, I'd be sitting down and saying, look, this is a massive opportunity for you. Daniel James will play as well, of course, but Daniel James is a good footballer, is a good squad player, but he's inconsistent. And let's be honest, he came from Swansea City. It's a massive jump between Swansea City in the Championship to Manchester United. So what I'd be saying to young Ahmad would be, look, Daniel James is a very good squad player. You're competing probably with him at the moment for more regular game time. Come into this game next week, shows what you can do, and you might get a run between now and the end of the season. I think that's the way I would be playing it. I certainly wouldn't be risking Rashford in that second leg. Last half an hour, if Granada somehow come flying out the traps and score 2 goals in the first half time, you might be sitting there thinking, right, this is a different story. I need to get him on now, and he needs to be the difference like he was tonight. But I certainly wouldn't be starting him and risking him if there's no pressing need to.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to talk about Marcus Rashford for, Joe, is he's now 3 goals away from kind of topping his overall amount of goals in an individual season. For someone that we have kind of criticised in terms of the touch, in terms of his finishing, to become the top scorer in a season, I think it would be the first time a Manchester United player would go 20 goals in the season back-to-back since we've had Wayne Rooney, which is kind of remarkable when we kind of look at those United teams from years and years that you went from the likes of Ruud van Nistelrooy to Wayne Rooney, Robin van Persie, and then we go a good number of years, and it's kind of what we've been missing since Ferguson's left. But the fact that Rashford's been able to turn himself into a player that can do this, and he hasn't really been playing as the central striker, you really have to give it up to kind of his work ethic and how much he actually puts into the team. And it shows the fact that he does get injured quite a bit. It's the fact that he's playing pretty much every game, regardless of if he has an injury or not. Like, we talk about every summer that he has to have some sort of like small surgery that has to be done, and people expect him to be fully fit, and then he gets another injury. And unfortunately this summer it's a little bit bad because he'll be with the England side, so he doesn't really get a chance to rest. So any chance we can get now is probably a good time to get him, to kind of preserve him a little bit longer. Yeah,
definitely. Because look, this is a kid who you want to have a great long career, and you feel like he's one of those players. The longer his career goes, the greater it will be, because he has got plenty of talent. We don't want him being done in his early 30s, do we? Which you feel like he's sort of heading towards the moment with all these injuries and things. But it's really strange because I feel like it myself when I watch him play. I feel like I've been more frustrated by him this season than any season. And it's really weird because he's having one of his best seasons in terms of his output, in with the stats, with the goals and the assists. But I've sort of sat and thought about this, and I just think it's because of my personal expectation of him, and that's down to how good he's been previously. And when someone does well, you just want them to keep improving year on year, year in, year out. And you look at, Martial's a good example. I mean, he has a season like he does last year, and then obviously struggles again this year. But actually, if you look at Martial's time at United, that's just how it's been. It's been one good season followed by a poorer one, followed by a good one, by a poorer one. Whereas Rashford just seems to be just gently going up and up and up, and that's great to see. And look, I'm not surprised at this determination to play and this sort of tenacity that he showed. You've only got to look at the work that he's done off the football pitch as well, haven't you? You know what I mean? I mean, the way he's taken on governments and the way that he's forced change. You don't do things like that unless you've got something special inside you in terms of mentality. And he obviously transfers that, into his football and the way he wants to play every week. Look, I think we were chatting in the group chat, and I think Hader put something in there that was really cool. He put a gift in there of a guy who was like really injured, and he just said, "This is Marcus Rashford going to Ollie and saying, I promise you I'm fine to play." He probably isn't, but, you can imagine that conversation every game. Ollie's probably saying, "Are you all right?" And he's giving him the nod because he wants to play. And I think that's really, it's commendable of him, but it's also a little bit of an indication of what it takes to be a Manchester United player these days under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I think this is what he's looking for in his players now. He said a couple of weeks ago in a press conference, I think, didn't he? He said their careers don't belong to themselves anymore. Their careers belong to Manchester United. And this is the kind of makeup of a player that Ollie's trying to get. And when you look at the signings that he's made since he's come in, and, you look at, we've criticised earlier about his style of play, but he's certainly put an ethos in place where players know now that if they want to be successful at this club, they got to play through the pain barrier sometimes. They got to play when they're 80%. They've got to give it all on the pitch. And to be honest with you, I want to see other things go alongside that, but that is a really good starting point, I think, for this football club now moving forward. And I hope that carries on in the years to come with whoever else takes charge, because that's what you always got from the players under Alex Ferguson. You know, Alex Ferguson didn't suffer fools. If he thought you wasn't prepared to put your body on the line, or you weren't giving everything for the shirt, you simply didn't play. And I think, look, it was good enough for 26 years under Alex. I don't see why it can't be good enough for Ollie.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think where a lot of that comes from, and you do see it with Rashford, I think probably stems from the style of player Wayne Rooney was, Callum, because, look, Solskjaer was one of his teammates as well, and he saw kind of the work ethic that Rooney had. Like, think about it early on in his career. 1 minute Rooney would be taking a shot, the next minute he's back in defence. And it was one of those that's unbelievable. The one point I wanted to bring up that kind of Joe mentioned is, when we talk about the modern day footballer, there's not many that are like Marcus Rashford that will go through that kind of pain barrier. It's different in the middle of a game if a doctor comes on saying that somebody needs to be taken off. You always hear the player want to stay on. But it's difficult to get that kind of culture that Joe talks about, where you have to kind of go through the pain barrier and play, and that your career is more for Manchester United than for the player. Nowadays, we hear so much about kind of the individual players wanting to force a move to this team or this team. It's all about their career, and it's not so much about the teams. We hear about there's not as much loyalty in football anymore. Do you think that this idea that Joe mentions that Ollie is trying to put into Manchester United, one, do you think that it is sustainable the way modern day football is? And two, do you think that the one thing, well, for me, the one thing it mentions is that it shows the particular type of player that Manchester United want to recruit. And for me, that's something good, because at least it means that there's a plan in place for the style of player. Because we were talking earlier that in a system, you want the particular styles of players to bring in. The fact that if Ollie is identified, well, our starting point is that we're going to work harder than any other team. If you can do that and then you sprinkle in a couple superstars into your team, that's when you start to see kind of Manchester United reach the next level.
Absolutely, and I go back to what I said earlier about what our opponent at the weekend. Same coach, different players. Well, United have progressed a long way since that was the rhetoric that was coming out of United under Mr. Mourinho. So I think it's safe to say that Ollie has definitely improved the culture of Manchester United. Luke Shaw for me is the shining example of that. Luke Shaw under Jose Mourinho he just looked like a player who wanted to probably give up. And see, to be honest with you, at the time, with the aggression that he was being spoken about by his manager, you could probably understand why. Whereas the one thing about Solskjaer that really impresses me is the fact that he's clearly a good man manager. That you see players like Rashford who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the team, who are willing to go that extra mile when necessary. I think for me that shows you the complete contrast to what Mourinho was like towards those latter days. You make a good point. Is that sustainable longer term? The obvious and honest answer is no, it isn't. However, what I would say on that is, if Rashford was seriously injured and he couldn't play, I don't think he would be playing, because I don't think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is the sort of man who would be happy to be playing Rashford when it's seriously damaging his health long term in a particular area of his body. So I think it's important to say that yes, he is probably, and he will be playing through the pain barrier. We know he is, but I don't think it's at a point where it's going to be at the complete detriment of his career. I mean, the one again that springs to mind, you mentioned him just a few moments ago, is Wayne Rooney. Wayne Rooney with England in major tournaments. How many times did we see him going to a tournament where he was clearly unfit? He was clearly not in a fit way to play, and probably even not in the right way mentally because of the pressure that was on him. So I don't think Rashford's at that stage where it's to a real detriment of him. I think it's very honourable that he is playing through that barrier, because Martial for me is a player who is the opposite in many ways. For me, Martial's the sort of guy that 10 or 15 minutes into a game decides right, I'm going to knuckle down and play, or next week I'll be around anyway. So I think Rashford's the opposite that. He's the epitome of what Solskjaer's wanting to do. I think Shaw's another one. And you're right when you talk about the culture of the club. He's definitely instilled a culture that says we will outwork everyone as a matter of principle, which, to be honest with you, for Manchester United, that should always be the case, or more often than not should be the case. I don't think it means you set up and you just play athletes as such. I don't think Solskjaer does that. I think you're right. You need to have a workman-like team, and you need to sprinkle some stardust like Bruno Fernandes, like Paul Pogba in and around the team. The only thing that for me it needs to be addressed, I would say into next season in particular, is the issue of that stardust, because one of the things that I would say, the comment there saying Rashford looked off it tonight overall, I think the one thing that I would say about United, which is different to Manchester City, as we've all mentioned, is United are a very good unit and they're workmanlike and they outwork you, but sometimes in the final third it seems to still rely on individual brilliance, and it's a case of, you're my front three, we'll outwork you. When we get to the front three, they'll make something happen. At times it needs to be a little more structured than that. I think Manchester City have shown most sides in the Premier League that it can be more structured than that. And I think that's something United need to work towards, because as much as I love Bruno Fernandes, and as much as most Manchester United, or if all Manchester United fans love Bruno Fernandes, he will pick an injury up at some stage, or a suspension where he's missing for 3, 4, maybe even 5 games. So United need to make sure that they can get to a point over this next 12 to 18 months, 24 months max, that they have that set style of play. And that comes down to recruitment, as you've mentioned. The culture's changed. The recruitment with John Murtagh and Darren Fletcher being in their positions this summer hopefully will change to the point where United get their business done early. I'm always worried for clubs, not just United, when you're going into a European Championship, because teams like Bayern Munich get their business done early in summers like this. They get it done so that there's no saga. United, as we all know, seem to enjoy a saga. They seem to let things drag out. With the Euros being on this summer, a saga becomes really difficult, because you get players, and Van Gaal was the same when he was approached to be manager, that will say, during this tournament, I don't want to hear anything about it. And that just leaves you susceptible to more deadline day panic. So my hope is the culture's improved. United hopefully can have a trophy in the cabinet this summer. They can sustain second place in the league, not being too far behind City. They can get some efficient business done, and we can maybe be looking at next season and be even more hypercritical, and, as I've just said, talk about patterns of play and talk about consistency, rather than heading into a summer where we might be saying, oh, are we going to get him? Is Sancho coming? Is he going? Or I think United, as they need to move past that now. And in terms of a style of play, they need to, for me, the hypercritical thing I've got with Solskjaer is, and it's not just Manchester United, so many of the sort of top sides away from Man City, I would say, in England, are in a position where there's a lot of individual brilliance being relied on in the front three or the front four. And I think to be successful for a sustained period, you do kind of need to move away from that, because, as I say, if not, you're 1 or 2 injuries away from having a natural plateau.
Yeah, that's one thing that I always it was one thing I was never happy about for United, is when you do get to that kind of attacking third of the game, everything just becomes very kind of stagnant and not a lot of stuff actually happens. You look at the teams under Ferguson and the way they attacked, you could tell that there was a style that they had to play under with them. You look at Bayern Munich, the same thing happens. Those great Barcelona teams, it wasn't just Lionel Messi dribbling past 10 players and putting the ball in the net. Well, that would happen at times. You saw the different players come in and out. You saw players like David Villa come in and out. You had Pedro, you had, even early on when you had the likes of Thierry Henry and stuff that went over there, Henrik Larsson, that they all played a specific kind of, they had a role in that attacking line. It's the same thing that we've seen over probably the past 3 or 4 months now, that when it gets to that attacking third of the game, you look at the attackers and they're all kind of standing in their spaces and there's not a lot of movement. It doesn't really look like there's any set plays that they've kind of been working on. And it's a worrying tactic, because look, if you have players like United had before when you had the likes of Tevez, Berbatov, Ronaldo, Rooney. You can get away with that because there's so many attacking talents there that you can feed off each other. The issue is when you have strikers that haven't really been clinical enough up to now, that haven't shown that they can be very consistent, that's when you really do need a structure. When you have a player like Mason Greenwood coming into a side that 18, 19 years of age, he needs to be able to know what he's supposed to do and not just make it up as the game happens. While there is a certain element of that you do have to play with what's in front of you, you should still have some sort of structure. And it's the one thing that, like Callum says, I think it's the biggest problem for United, because they can set up defensively really well, where at times they look like they're not going to concede. When they play decent in midfield, you start to see the ball moving. But the biggest problem, and I think I've heard it in the last 5 or 6 games, that when it gets into that attacking third, it's too slow. There's not enough creativity, and the attackers aren't getting in behind. And that's a big problem, because you look at our attackers and where they actually score the majority of their goals is when they do get in behind. And the fact that we don't do that is the main reason why we hear all the different podcasts that we go on to, that we listen to, all the pundits say, well, they're not creating enough chances. Well, the reason they're not creating enough is because that structure in that final third just isn't there, Joe.
Yeah. Going
into a game at the weekend, we'll do kind of a minute or two on kind of the preview for the Tottenham gigs. We've mentioned some parts already. Against the Tottenham side, where Mourinho has a full week to prepare, is one of the ones that that's always the one that is the most worrying for me, is that a manager like Mourinho having that full week. I would have been very confident if Tottenham were playing tonight in the Europa League, because I would have been like, okay, he has a couple of days. But the fact that he's had the whole week to look at this, put his plan in place, if that attacking unit isn't firing against Tottenham at the weekend, it's going to be a big problem, because they can set up defensively, and with the players that they have, they can really catch you on the break. Hopefully that at halftime, Luke Shaw was being taken off just as the yellow card precaution. Hopefully he doesn't get sent off, rather than it being an injury. If he's injured, I think United are in a little bit of trouble when we play against Tottenham, because even while they haven't been the Tottenham we saw at the start of the season, some of the players on the pitch for them, you look at Son, you look at Kane, you look at the recent emergence of Gareth Bale as well, it's going to be a lot for that defence to have to deal with.
Yeah, look, for all the criticism of Jose Mourinho and all the talk of dinosaur tactics and everything like that, if there's one coach I wouldn't want to give a week to prep for a game against my team, it'd probably still be Jose Mourinho, because I think you can say what you want about the guy. You know, you could argue maybe Pep as well. You know, Pep's pretty good at coming up with the game plan, although I do think Pep's been guilty a few times of overthinking things, and sometimes when he does try and get clever with game plans, he's got caught out. But, you know, this is classic for Jose now. A week to sort of prepare for this, a week to come up with a plan. I don't know whether he had a week last season, but if you remember the game we had at Tottenham last season, when he played Bergwijn on that left-hand side, he saw that there were vulnerability there with Luke Shaw, who we know he doesn't rate. He never rated him as a Manchester United manager, so he hopefully has a bit more respect for him now, given the season he has, but he's certainly got no respect for Harry Maguire's pace. And if you remember, he set Bergwijn up on that left-hand side and did a number for the first goal, and you know, you're thinking something similar again, and it worries me. Like we said earlier, we don't know the situation with Luke Shaw yet, but if he's injured, you know, United down that left-hand side defensively now with the likes of Tellez and you know, Harry Maguire with his pace, that becomes a real target area for Jose. I think he'd have probably been looking at that side anyway, but, you know, even more so if Alex Tellez is on that left-hand side, it becomes a real problem. And as for going forward for United, yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes it's not all about tactics, you know, breaking down low blocks. It's about that moment, you know, a moment of quality. And sometimes unstructured football can be a positive thing, because, you know, if you don't know what you're doing as a football side, how are the opponents meant to know what you're trying to do? But like Callum said, and like you said, that's not sustainable. And moving forward, United do have to have a clearer plan about how they're trying to get at teams and how they're actually trying to score goals. And as good as Mason Greenwood's been for me recently playing number 9, and I think he has done really well in the last few games, there are still little things that I think he needs to improve on. There were little things tonight that I saw in terms of, again, he looks like he wants to come to the ball, to receive the ball. That's fine. That's obviously what he's being told to do. But I want to see him at number 9, especially a number 9 like Mason, being on the shoulder of a defender, because you know he's got the pace, and then you know if he's one-on-one, you're going to fancy him more than most people. And the issue with him dropping off so deep at the moment with the state of his individual game is that I don't think his first touch is quite there yet. I think a few times tonight it sort of bounced off him quite heavily, and he's sort of, the deeper you come, that means you're giving it away in a more dangerous position. There was a few times he sort of came towards the halfway line. The ball was sort of bounced into him, and it sort of bounced off him. Now, that's not just Mason, because that happened to a few players tonight. But again, if Mason's going to be that number 9, that focal point, he needs to tighten up on that. But the point is, it becomes more back to, like you were saying, Ciaran, that's a weakness in his game, but I don't want to see him doing that anyway. So if he wasn't actually asked to do that, and he was asked to be a number 9 that played more on the shoulder, I don't think we'd have to worry about that. I think that's what we saw when Romelu Lukaku was at the club. We all knew that he had an issue sometimes with his first touch and protected the ball. But the way you get around that sometimes is don't ask them to do that then. You know, again, Romelu Lukaku, play him off the shoulder of a defender. I mean, if he's running at you and you know, he's on your shoulder, nobody's stopping him. And it's the same with Mason. I mean, he's quick enough, and you know when he's on, you know, one-on-one with a keeper, he'll finish. So I think it's a little bit unfair on Mason at the moment because he's being asked to do a number 9's job that he's not really meant to do. So this is where I want to see the coach, you know, either get a number 9 in that can do what he wants to do with the number 9, i.e. in Ireland, which won't happen, but that kind of striker, or get Mason to do what he should be doing, what he's best at, playing on the shoulder. And that, as a fan, is what I would rather see him at number 9 doing as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to talk about, because you've mentioned it before, Callum, at the start of the show, and I've said it previously in other podcasts, is that I want to see Mason get a run of games at the number 9 position and get to play centrally, because at the end of the day, where his best position is as a striker. Now, the problem that I have, and at times it worries me, is the fact that he's played at the right wing so often that he tends to deviate over there even when he is to be the central striker. And for me, I feel like Solskjaer needs to do a little bit of work with Mason to get him staying in the box. Because look, the one thing you mentioned, and we've said it before, he's a natural finisher. I don't see Mason Greenwood enough in the opponent's box. And it's one thing that really, really needs to happen, because we saw it at the end of last season that he can get one chance and score. It constantly happened when we got back from lockdown. He was probably one of the best players for the United team when we got back from lockdown from the previous season. But the difference was where he was picking the ball up. A lot of the time it was either at the edge of the box and him running in, dribbling into the box. We're not seeing enough of that. We're seeing him having to pick the ball up kind of between the halfway line and the box, and he's having to try and dribble past a couple of players and give a pass in, when that's really not the best facet of his game. Now, we've seen him improve on that side of things, but at the end of the day, he's a striker. Right now, he's going to be playing as the centre forward, and he needs to get into the box more. Would you prefer to see that side of his game develop a little bit more? Because you used to see it in the academy every single week. He would be dynamic in the middle, but over the last 6 months, I don't think I've seen enough of that when he has been used as that central striker.
You mentioned the fact that he has been playing on the right-hand side so often, and really that's just, I suppose, a habit now for him. That's where he's been playing more often than not, and it's probably what I would call the Martial conundrum. Anthony Martial has for many years wanted to be a striker, played out left for a number of years, and then, if you're asking me honestly, has he ever really taken his chance when he's played through the middle, Martial, to say, I'm the man, long term, I'm going to wear this number 9 jersey, I'm going to take it, back me, you're in safe hands here? I don't think he has. And the thing with Mason Greenwood is he's still young. And I agree with that comment. Sometimes the front three are too fluid. Because one of the points you make was tonight when he was coming deep, and he did have a few heavy touches, and there was one point, Joe, you referenced it perfectly, where he picks the ball up in that central position, but he's not picking it up in the most dangerous central position because he's too far away from the goal. So he's trying to take on a couple of players, and he gets to the edge of the box where you want him picking the ball up and he's giving it away. You know, you want him receiving that ball, as you've said, Ciaran, on the edge of the box where he can take one touch, two touch, out his feet. He's getting on target or he's getting close, you know. Whereas at the moment, he's picking the ball up in areas where he's taking about 3 or 4 touches and he's not really closer to getting a shot off. He's having to take a couple of touches and look to go back wide, or even worse, go backwards, which is not what you want when you're in those key positions. You want him, as you've said, to get that ball near the edge of the box, be able to take a couple of good touches and get out of his feet, because how many times last season did we see him get that ball, as you say, closer to the edge or inside the box, a touch, maybe 2 touches, out his feet and goal. And that's what, for me, your Manchester United striker needs to be. I mean, if you could have a Haaland, it would be fantastic, because he is someone who, because of his physical presence, picks it up, holds it up, gets it wide and gets into the box. Whereas Mason and Martial aren't those kind of strikers. They're not the sort of strikers that are going to play back to goal, pick it up, get it wide, and you'd back them in the air. They're decent in the air, but that's not the main facet of their game. You need to have them picking it up on the edge and doing what they're good at, and that is finishing. Joe, you mentioned playing on the shoulder. That is what you want to see from Mason. I think with the way that sides are setting up with defending deep, you're probably going to have to rely on him picking it up and, as I say, taking maybe a few touches and getting out of his feet rather than playing on the shoulder week in, week out, because we saw it with Daniel James when he arrived against Chelsea. He comes off the bench in that first game, the 4-0 win. He looks scintillating. And then, Ciaran, you mentioned our good friends at Wolves, sit very deep. He's taken out the game and he ends up coming off after 60 minutes. So it's about finding that balance. It's about finding a set system for your centre forward. I mean, most centre forwards are very good at what they do. You know what their strengths are, and I referenced that earlier when we talked about systems. I mean, I hate to mention them, but look at Liverpool. Liverpool, when they won the title, you knew how Liverpool were going to play when they went into a game, but Liverpool got to a point where this is how we play. Back yourself to stop it. And I think that's what the top sides do. You look at City. If City are playing away to Chelsea or they're playing at home to Dynamo Zagreb or whoever they're playing in Europe, they'll still set up the same way to dominate the ball, to have their front three interchanging positions and trying to sort of create the easiest possible finish for whoever's up top, whether it's a false nine or whether it's an established nine. Whereas United don't have that. There's a mixed bag where you've got Martial, who maybe sometimes does want to play in the shoulder. You've got Greenwood now, who's coming very deep. And then you've got the other one, who's Cavani, who's desperate to get into the box and move around and find that space to get that one chance and get that goal. So there isn't a real consistency in United centre-forward options, to be honest. And I think it's important you get Mason Greenwood back to basics almost in terms of forward play with the reference to the academy, absolutely. The only issue I think that United are going to have with that is with Cavani, if he is fit, Cavani's probably going to be the starting sort of striker more often than not. And with Greenwood playing some games up front and some games out wide, I think it can get lost a wee bit.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I'll leave this kind of last question to you, Joe, and just in relation to that. So we've heard all the stories in relation to Cavani, and it's a fairly decent chance that he may not even be at the club next season, because I know that there's been offers from like Boca Juniors, for example, and other teams back in kind of Argentina and South America. So if you're looking at this, especially moving forward, do you think it's maybe better off that you do start playing Mason Greenwood as that central striker, especially if what we've heard coming out of the club that they don't have the money really to go out and buy a player like Erling Haaland or someone in that ilk? That is it now the time that, look, it may be because of COVID, it may be because the owners don't really want to spend the money right now because they're not sure on stuff. Is it time that actually maybe you should just develop Mason Greenwood as your striker and get the winger in? Because often it's a lot easier to get in a successful winger than it is to get in a striker that's going to put 20 goals in a season for you. So maybe I've always had the thought this season that this was really one of those years that you really need to take advantage and start developing Mason in the position that you see him in being in long term. You ask anybody that's watched Mason Greenwood, he's not a winger, he's a striker. He can do it on the wing. I think everybody has gotten obsessed with putting your kind of young striker on the wing because Arsenal did it with Thierry Henry. And that's what we heard with Anthony Martial early on in his career, that he's a striker, but we're going to put him out here so he can learn the position and get to play. Well, it's easier to be brought in as a striker to go out onto the wing. It's also important that you do stick into that position because, like we mentioned earlier, you can get into bad habits where you start going into those positions that aren't positions for your striker. We see it with Martial. Even when he plays as a striker, he's constantly in the same position as Marcus Rashford. We're starting to see now Greenwood when he's playing as that central striker, there's times when he's too far to the right or too deep, when really he should be on kind of the last line of the defense and trying to get in behind. Now, there are times I think I see Greenwood do it more than Anthony Martial, but the team aren't actually picking it out. One of the times I saw it in the game was when Luke Shaw had the ball in the first half, and Greenwood actually made a really good run. He kind of curved his run, and instead of playing it, Luke Shaw just played a diagonal pass to McTominay instead of actually being a little bit more risky.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what Callum was saying, is when you have three different types of strikers and they all do different things, it's actually really hard for the players behind to know what to do. Because if you have the strikers that are doing the same thing all the time, you know what runs they're going to make.
Yeah.
But when you have Cavani doing one thing, Martial doing another, and Greenwood doing another, it can get confusing for the players that are actually there to try and set them up. So you think now, when you're looking forward, that it actually is a time that United need to use these last 10, 11 games and play Mason as that central striker and give him the time to develop, especially if we do win the next couple of games in the Premier League and you do secure top four.
Yeah, look, if United see Mason Greenwood as their number 9 for the next 10 years or plus 10 plus years, they have to start playing him there on a regular basis, because how else does he learn that position? You can do it Monday to Friday in training, all you like. You know, there's no substitute for playing in games and playing against top-class centre forwards. And that's how it becomes natural, by doing it through repetition against the best players, against the best defences, and scoring goals on a regular basis. The question is that what do United want from their number 9 in the next 10 years? That gives you the answer to whether Mason Greenwood should be their number 9 moving forward, or whether they need to invest in one. And it comes back to what we were talking about at the start of the show. It's style of play and finding that identity now, which I think is the next step for Ollie. I think we've all agreed on that. We've all kind of touched on it in this show. What does he want from that front three? What does he want from his number 9 specifically? Because if he's wanting a sort of all-round sort of target man, poacher, can do a bit of everything, I'm not sure Mason's his man to be. Because I just think things like that are either in you or they aren't. The striking, those predatory instincts, those sort of Ruud van Nistelrooy goals, just that knack of being in the right place at the right time. I'm not a great believer in that can be trained to an elite level. I think you can learn it and you can get better at it, but I think some players have either got it or they haven't. But if they want in the number 9 that offers what Mason offers right now, then yeah, play him. I think the temptation, I mean, you touched on it there, Ciaran, about these young players playing them wide strikers. I think it's kind of just the way football's been over the last few years off the top of my head. So many goals come from wide areas. So many young strikers, or even world-class strikers, scoring goals coming from their wide areas. You even think back to that MSN partnership at Barcelona. Messi and Neymar playing in those wider areas, obviously with Suarez down the middle. Scored so many goals, Messi and Neymar. And I'm not saying that everyone's Messi and Neymar, but you look around Europe, that's where the goals have been coming from elite sort of striking partnership. Liverpool last season, Mane and Salah playing those wider areas again. It seems like that's been the trend for where goals have come from as football's advanced sort of in the last 10 years. And as much as I'd love to see Mason do that job for the next 10 years, because how great would that be, having a number 9 that's come through the academy, scoring all your goals? If he can't do it, and he's not the makeup of what you want from your number 9, you can't just do it because he's Mason Greenwood, and because that's what you will always find a place for Mason in the team, but it might just not necessarily be number 9. But it's also nice to know that he's got that, you've got that flexibility with Mason as well in terms of, when it comes to squad rotation and, needing to mix up, you've got a bit of versatility there. So if he plays number 9, he can do you a job on the right. You know that now. And just to sort of finish off as well, you're talking there about signing a world-class right winger, whether that be Jadon Sancho. Unless this is sort of the issue that you said about Greenwood sort of drifted out to the right, unless that's kind of coached out of him, it could become a problem if you sign a class right winger, because he's going to sort of smudge the work of someone like Jadon Sancho if he's going to keep drifting out there, and he's going to make the right winger look sort of less effective, a little bit like Martial does when he plays centrally and he drifts out to the left. I think he smothers the work of Rashford a bit when he's playing on the left. So, if they're going to sign a quality right winger, they also need to make sure that Mason's not going to keep doing that, because United are just, from having nothing on the right, they're going to be too too heavy on the right. And yeah, it's a conundrum, but it all comes from it all starts with me with a style of play that needs to be developed over the summer.
Yeah, it's an interesting the 2 points you made there about Mason kind of drifting out to the right a bit. And look, that's what we were saying, that it does need to be coached out of him a bit. If you plan on having him as your kind of central striker, that it needs to be where he's told, well, that's the position he needs to concentrate on. And unfortunately, because he hasn't been given that run of games, it's difficult when you're going in one game playing as your striker, and then the next 2 or 3 games you're back out onto the right wing. It's hard for a young player to kind of get used to that. I agree with some of your points there in terms of a lot of the goals come from wide areas now, but I just look at the style of player, and when I look at Mason Greenwood and you look at his body type, you look at kind of the way he likes to play, he doesn't remind me of one of these typical kind of wide forwards. When you look at the likes of Mane, Salah, Mbappe, Neymar, because those are very silky, quick-paced footballers. While Mason's more of the excellent finisher, where if he gets one chance, he can hit that ball so hard that I think we saw it it was the Villa game last year, where before the goalkeeper could dive, the ball was already in the net. It's those positions that United need to get Mason Greenwood in, because when that happens, he can score goals. We saw plenty last season when we were terrible in the Europa League, and he bailed us out so many times with a 90th minute goal because he did his step overs and either going left or right. When you have a striker that can score both on their left and their right foot, and currently are now working on their heading ability, which I think last weekend was the first sight that Mason Greenwood was starting to take in some of the stuff that Cavani was doing. It's only kind of positive, and that's why I think I say that it's really important that we do kind of get him to start developing into that style of striker, make sure that he's getting in the box, that he's getting his chances, because that's when you're going to start to see him score more and more goals. Him being kind of at the edge of the box trying to work something, that's not going to be where his bread and butter should be. It should be in the box, sniffing around, getting that last touch, because when you have the finishing ability that Callum, you mentioned, that we don't see as much in Marcus Rashford, he needs to just get in those positions. And if he can do that, I think you'll start to see the benefits of playing him centrally over the next kind of 2 or 3 seasons. It was a great talk today, considering the game was quite boring overall. So it's been really good to actually be able to talk about some of this, so we can kind of leave on probably a more positive mindset than when we first came in talking about the game. It'll be an interesting one at the weekend. We'll be back next Thursday again for probably again after the Granada game. So just make sure that you stay with us. We'll be going live both on Twitter and on YouTube. You can find us on the Hollow Sports podcast on YouTube. Again, it's on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor. So just stick with us next week, and we will see you next